Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 6:39. Everybody, we now have a minute taker. Shauna Kerwin is going to be here taking our minutes for us today, so just big thanks to her already. She takes really good notes. With that, speak up, because if she can't hear you, the notes won't get taken. So she's sitting a little farther away than Allison is. Just think about that when you're speaking for her. So I don't see any visitors business today, but I did want to let you know that people were very interested at my town meeting about Act 46 in general, and I did give the information of when our meeting was going to be, and it seemed like people might actually show up. Maybe not. And I don't know whether or not other people at their town meetings had that, but I thought before we approve the minutes, we could just go around town by town and give just a real brief snippet of anything from Act 46 that came up at town meeting and generally how it went, since we had talked about it before, so that everybody can be on the same page. So Lincoln went well. Our budget got approved on the floor with the $17,400 increase that we asked for, and we did have a lot of questions about Act 46 and what it would mean in terms of ownership of property, what it would mean in terms of floor voting, and what it would mean in terms of just different ways we do things. So there was a lot of interest. So that was Lincoln. Go around the room this way and just work your way. So who's next? What town wants to go next? I go for
I'll let
okay.
Ellen go for Bristol.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So Bristol, we gave a little overview. The only question was concern about the Hannaford Career Center and how that fits in, and we said it doesn't, and we would still use it. There was no thought at all of that going away. Our budget passed by a good margin. And no, not really many questions at all, but we gave an overview, which we don't always do. But somebody told me as they went out, they were pleased with the fact that they felt that we owned the budget more this time, and they were really happy that everybody spoke before. That's been a comment that not everybody speaks, and so why are they on the school board if they can't talk?
Great. Okay, fantastic. Next town?
Beaman,
Beaman, go for it.
budget passed by a margin of almost 4-1. Not too many questions, although one resident offered that if Beaman were closed, he had 3 ideas on how it could be used. But we tried to defuse the notion that what we were doing was closing schools, that there would probably be a substantial amount of time before anything like that could be considered.
Great. Next school?
Starksboro, oh, Sarah,
No, it's okay. It was from Beaman.
did you have something you wanted to add?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
That's
Starksboro voted unanimously on the floor, voted up the budget. The town meeting began with our senators and representatives speaking. Dave Sharp spoke, and he didn't mention a thing about Act 46. And when our budget came up for vote, there were 1 or 2 questions about facilities, no conversation at all about Act 46.
Are you joking about him not mentioning Act 46?
No,
Because
I'm
that's all
not
they
joking.
talked about in Bristol, right?
Didn't mention it.
He knew his audience.
He got it
We
out
talked
of
about special ed costs and the crisis report and those sorts of things, but he didn't talk about Act 46 at all, as I recall.
Anything else?
I came in late. I missed Dave's talk.
Okay.
I was on time.
Next town? Go for it.
So the Moncton budget also passed by a good margin, I think roughly 3-1, in my head math. We did talk a little bit about Act 46 during our budget informational meeting, which for us is separate from town meeting. Basically, our board chair talked a little bit about it. We had not that many questions that came up at the informational meeting, and then at the actual town meeting, I spoke near the end and just spoke about that I was on the committee and if people wanted to share any thoughts or input, and only 1 person came up, and now it was granted at the end of the meeting. And the one guy who did come and speak to me basically said, so we're only joining ANASU together? Like, can we join multiple supervisory unions and have fewer central offices and fewer superintendents? So I thought, while I don't know that that's representative of the Moncton population, I thought that was an interesting perspective. Dave Sharp also spoke about similar things that you mentioned in special ed, he did get a question from someone in our audience about equalized pupils and phantom students, and so that touched a little like on Act 46. But yeah, overall, it really was not a topic.
Okay, did I miss any towns? Okay, and did the Mount Abraham vote pass?
Yes.
Yes, okay, I thought so, I just want to make sure. Great. So the next thing to say is that my understanding is that other than Huntington, all of the school unification votes passed and by not a slim majority for all of those towns. Now, what that means, feel free to imply whatever you like, but that's the information I have after town vote day. So then I would ask, did anybody have any changes to any of the minutes that are on the agenda for us to approve? Seeing none, I'm going to move that we approve the minutes from February 3rd, 2016 and February 17th, 2016. Can I get a second for that, please?
Second.
Okay, I have a second from Stephen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. So then we will move on. You should have received via email in advance a memo basically from Andrew that he created with some timelines and some more information about some governance possibilities. Did everybody receive that? Okay.
I got something referring to a corrected version of it without any attachment.
I can send that to
It's
part of the
everybody,
file.
because she did send it to
13
me when I
pages.
said I
It's just
hadn't
part of the
gotten it.
it's part of
Yeah,
the
you go past the
agenda.
minutes from your
Yeah,
original.
okay, it was part of it, nothing in addition to that.
No, nothing in addition. Okay, so what I would like to do is I would like to open the floor and allow Andrew just a brief second to kind of touch on that memo. And then for you all to be able to ask questions so that we can just flush out that discussion, because I know that was an important issue for us was timeline and just really kind of making sure we had maybe more definitively thought of exactly what governance structures we're considering when we continue forward with this discussion, or what our options might be. So, Andrew, I'll let you start.
Yeah, so the first 3 pages are basically talking about structures, and I took some of the pictures, the second and third pages from that presentation that I had given at that first meeting where, I think it was your second meeting, but the first meeting that I was present at. And I think some folks have since joined the committee and might not have seen that. But in terms of your choices, these are the ones that I'm aware of. And essentially there are 2 choices: the unified union, where there's 1 board, or the elementary union, where you would have merged all the elementary school boards together. Those, of course, have some variations if you allow for the possibility of not requiring all the districts to join it. And that's the 3rd page where there are those options. So I don't think we want to get into the pros and cons of these at this moment in our discussion, but I guess this might be a time to ask if folks are clear on what those structures are, if you have questions about them.
Herb.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused, Andrew. I mean, I know that these, what you've outlined, are what you've heard talked about in terms of different types of governance structures. But when you talk about, well, these are the only 2 options, I get confused, because when I look at the provision of Act 46 that talks about alternative governance structures, it lays out, it talks about, well, you might not be able, it might not be the best idea to do a preferred structure. There's some situations where you could have multiple member districts, and that's perfectly okay as long as you meet certain criteria relating to the goals, relating to, you need to be collectively considering yourself as responsible for the whole education, maximize efficiency, etc. So I'm having trouble understanding why you're thinking that these are the only 2 options, because I can imagine more than these options.
The only defined ones by the legislature, right? We're only going by
So
what's defined.
the fifth bullet in my list there says that you could propose an alternate structure. The ones that I have outlined are the ones that are written into law. These are ones that other districts have considered or proposed or approved.
We're not limiting the idea of the alternate structure. These are just the ones defined, that we have the actual pictures and the layouts for.
That's fine, I just get confused when Ranger talks about only two options.
Oh, so let's maybe use
Because I don't think
language,
that's, I think,
clarify.
I think the statute says, okay, here are alternative structures, you gotta meet these criteria, but as long as you meet these criteria, hey, great.
So in the standard options, maybe that's a better term to use, I've sort of categorized I think I have six different things pictured. I grouped those into two different standard choices. And certainly the option of coming up with something different is always.
Because I could imagine a different picture. You know, if I could have, you know, figured out that program on Microsoft Office, it'd be great, but I can't. So, you know, I could have figured out a different picture that had an alternative structure that was different.
Go ahead.
So my understanding was that the standards that the state was recommending, that most of these others don't really apply to us because we have to have more than 900 students. So the high school can't stand on its own as it has less than 900 students. So we couldn't really split the high school and the elementary schools and make that minimum number. Is that true?
If you're going to look seriously at that option, we'd have to look at that.
It would
Right.
be a five. It's not like their standard, what they're recommending, because
They
it
can allow
doesn't make the
exceptions.
number.
Yeah,
Okay.
they can allow exceptions, and I don't think we're so far off that they would be totally an immediate no. But yes, it's correct that their preference is 900.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, on top of some other questions, including that, you would also have to make the argument that that structure really made sense. And I think that in itself is a challenge to say that you're being responsible for kids from K through 12 when you have two different boards making decisions based on grade.
Go ahead, Jen.
So I appreciate you putting all this together and putting this in front of us again, because I think it is sometimes hard to remember all the different possibilities and the different terms that get thrown around. I can only speak for myself, but from what I've heard from the discussions of this committee, I don't feel like that elementary union and the high school union addresses any of the concerns that we've been talking about. So I would be willing to just cross that right off the list of things we're considering. I think people are concerned about unifying the elementary schools. So if you're going to unify them, you might as well just go for the whole thing.
And
And in a practical sense, if we did put forward an alternative with less than 900 students per portion district, and it went to the state, and the state sent it back to us and said, no, we'll have busted our timeline, we might lose a whole year.
Herb.
Okay, I'm going back to the alternative structures section in, was it 5C of the statute? And the requirement that I'm reading is that the combined daily average membership of all member districts is not less than 1,100. So I'm not sure, maybe there's some other provision somewhere that I'm not aware of, but I'm looking at the criteria for an alternative government structure, and I don't see our situation numbers-wise being a barrier.
And just a clarification, ADM and enrollment are two different things. Let's just be clear about that. Enrollment is the actual students who are in our schools.
Okay. Fair
ADM
enough.
is the average number of students who are attending our schools on a daily basis between like October 10th and October 20th. I don't know the exact dates. And then they accumulate all those up, and then that's how they come up with the ADM. So I just want to make sure that we make sure we differentiate between enrollment and ADM.
I saw another hand.
So I don't know what the ADM means in that, quite honestly, I don't know what that means.
Go ahead.
I keep hearing people talk about alternative structures, and I cannot visualize what any of those are.
Yeah.
And
I
so
agree.
I'm just saying, if you're going to bring it up, then I think we should actually present what you're
Yeah.
picturing
I
that it
agree.
would be. Because I'm having a hard time going, why wouldn't one of these work well?
Hold on, guys, hold on. So if we all start talking, I know for a fact our note taker is going to be miserable in terms of taking notes for no other reason. Okay, so we heard a comment that maybe it would be helpful if people have specific thoughts in mind for what the alternative structure would look like. It might be fun to get to actually see those on paper somehow, whether drawn or digitally made, so that people can start maybe visualizing more about the structure. Nancy, and then Stephen, and then Mike.
So what you've suggested is something we might do as a group or in small groups?
Absolutely, I don't want to put
Our meetings.
anybody on the spot, so I think it's a great creative opportunity for us to try to define what we're thinking. Stephen, I said next.
We have, I think, we're not really ready to dive into our little governance structure yet. Discussion, I think. We still have more work to do on the pros and cons that we started on. And I'm very interested in getting to the timeline that Andrew put together.
And we will, yes, Mike. Nope, I had Nancy, Stephen, and then Mike.
So I have said a few times that yes, we do need to get to a place of looking at what the alternative governance structure might look like. A few of us, I sat down with a few people at the bakery the other day and started to just sort of like tear through, like what could it look like? And I don't have anything to present. I think it would be a mistake to present anything because I think the process is actually as important as any outcome. But I think the process of looking at where different responsibilities, decision-making and governance-like responsibilities might live is an interesting discussion with really about the concept of having an elected, continuing to have an elected local entity attached to the elementary schools with a different set of responsibilities than they currently have. A set of responsibilities that this group might think still should exist attached to the local schools. So I think it would be good for us to spend some time doing that at a future meeting.
Okay, and then we wanted to go, Andrew?
I do need to respond to that, and I think I've tried, and maybe not as effectively as I should have in the past. One concern that I have about the discussions we've had about alternate structures is that without naming anything in particular, we're talking about how responsibilities might play out in some hypothetical structure. I would be very concerned if we were to go down a road of trying to define a structure that was different from the way things are written in statute. Statutes define the responsibilities of supervisory unions and school boards, and to talk about changing those, I think, may not be a very effective use of our time. At a minimum, that's going to require an attorney's opinion. I think it could be a very difficult road to go down to try and get the Agency of Education to approve and the State Board of Education to approve a governance structure that changes the responsibilities of a school board or a supervisory union.
So I think I'm...
Hold on, Mike. Okay, because I saw a bunch of hands go up, so can I just see all the hands that went up so I can mentally make a note of who all wants to talk? Okay, Mike, go ahead, and then Nancy and then
I
Elaine.
think, Andrew, I think I'm hearing you say that you don't believe that anything other than the structures laid out by the legislature could pass muster with the board.
You can feel free to answer that question.
I think, we've kind of gone around it, but I think I'm understanding you to say that really the only thing that's going to work with the board is what is
I think you need to give some specifics, because Andrew has given me specifics about like who can be in charge of hiring principals and stuff, and I think that he's concerned that more in the nuances of dividing responsibilities up, we might inadvertently kind of step over the line of what we can do, and that will require us to be very cautious when we're having these discussions, and probably pull in an expert to have to say, yes, that's something within statute you can apply to a different board, like the ones we might create, or no, that's one that is very clearly by case law or something given to this, or that's not their intent and we have to keep it where it lies because statute says that. I think that's what Andrew's saying, because I don't think he's ever said that we can't do something else. I think it's just we have to stay within the, how there's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I think we have to stay within both, and unfortunately that can sometimes be complicated. And I think he just wants us to be cautious that we don't start going so far outside of that we start wasting our time. He just wants to make sure we stay in the road. Nancy?
Well, I think it is true that there's some clear language, and I'm not familiar with it directly. But I know that there's some clear language in the statute now in Title 16 about what a board can delegate and who they can delegate to. So that would be useful in that kind of conversation. The other thing I would say is that quite surprisingly at town meeting when I had a chance to talk with Dave Sharp, because I had sent him an email about the question of the responsibilities of school councils and school boards. It's really a question I've been asking since Act 46 began. And he said that he sounded, let me say, he sounded very interested in, and sounded like he'd been doing a lot of talking with other people about the roles of school councils or local school boards in a merged system, and what roles and responsibilities they might take on. And he also indicated to me that if we as a group, and I wasn't pretending to speak for our group, everybody knows I'm in this group, he said if we as a group got to a point where we wanted to set things up in such a way, in a certain way, and we found that the law was in our way, that he, as chair of the House Education Committee, would certainly want to know about it and would want to try and help if they could.
Great, so maybe when we're defining those alternative structures, maybe we could highlight some of those areas that we think might be problematic and discuss that further with him. I had said Elaine first, and then we'll go to you, Caleb.
So, as I've been thinking about what I think we're worried about and what I think that we've had problems with, I'm wondering if it belongs in the governance structure or in the ends policies and other policies. And it kind of seems bizarre to me that we can create ends policies and they're not voted on at town meeting. You know, and maybe what we want is some sort of ends policy saying that we value input from the community and we have to have input from the community. And so I'm kind of torn between, I don't want us only to talk about governance structure when it has to be so tied in with everything else. And so I think it's a mistake if we separate them completely and don't think about the best way to achieve what we want to achieve. I don't know, that's very muddled and it is not really a complete thought. But
Caleb, go for it.
Yeah, just kind of stepping back a little here, when I look at the presentation that's included here, we've got the couple of models of the pre-K through 12 unified and then the other split between elementary. I totally agree that doing just the elementary union district doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And then you've got the modified, and it's kind of like the modified category is everything else conceivable, but there's certain things, there's not a lot of variables really at play. Like the modified, you can kind of think of it as a really complicated, endlessly, oh look at this, endlessly complicated, got on camera saying it. But really it's not that complicated. We've got like 6 pieces and they're all going together in one solution probably. So it kind of seems to me, that's one thought. The other thought of what I heard Andrew saying is we can't restart necessarily from the beginning, because there's some statute that's not like new with Act 46. It's just statute for education in Vermont, and we can't get around it, and yeah, so we can't totally change the idea of what a school district is, what a school board is, and that kind of thing, and I understand that. One example I've been thinking of that I'll just throw out, because I think it kind of illustrates maybe a place where the rubber could hit the road, is I imagine a new district. I'm imagining the first model, like all the towns are together. Instead of having an SU board, like we have now, we've got this board that looks kind of like the SU board. Is it 15 people? Is it 18 people? I don't know, but it's basically now the board for the whole thing. And then you've got towns, and think about the fact that like right now, Lincoln's got a 5-person board, but in this 15-person committee only gets a delegation of 2, whereas Starksboro has a 3-person board, and in this delegation we get 3. So that's just kind of interesting. Lincoln gets 40% of their board on this, we get 100%. That's just because of individual decisions that our towns have made about our municipal governance structure. It doesn't affect our pro rata or our percentage of this group. And so I can imagine a way in which you could have a town council where Lincoln could still say, we've got a 5-person town council. And that town council gets a delegation of 2 people that they delegate to be on the governance committee. That's just one example where you could say, I'm maintaining something from my town-specific culture, but I'm falling into the fact that we've got like this 15-person board, that we've got a delegation, and that's really where our town gets governance, some kind of real bite of the governance. But the other stuff, and maybe it's your bigger board in Lincoln, or your still 3-person board in Starksboro, whatever it is, maybe you formally say, and that council, rather than the delegation, that council is primarily responsible for outreach, or like educational outreach, or things like that. And you could form and start to say, like, we're carving out a role for the other members of that council that are not part of the like governing delegation at that time, that starts to bring in some of the specifics from the town. And it's like a way that you're not tearing down like what a board has to be per statute, you know, aside from Act 46, but you are starting to incorporate like that specific.
I don't first one.
Anyway.
No, sorry. I just had a weird idea, and I'm saying it out loud so everybody else can hear the weird idea in case I forget, and then I'm gonna make Andrew and myself figure this out because I have no idea. But it occurs to me that maybe the towns could be responsible, just like they have a select board, for them themselves as the select board, putting out a position that is like a school council for the town, that is responsible to the select board and not the school district board for the community and welfare, that could be like a liaison point between the town and the school district. And since it's underneath the select board themselves, they could position however many positions they want on this particular committee, and it could be for outreach, special funding events maybe for a town or something like that, the community involvement in the town or things like that. Maybe just a different angle. Maybe what we want could happen even if for some reason it didn't fit through the creation of our governance structure, for whatever reason, if it couldn't. Michaela.
So it seems like there are some people that would have no problem going with one of the governance structures that were on here. That makes perfect sense in their head for how we can best serve kids here. And there are some people that think there must be a different way to do this that better meets the needs of our kids here. And a barrier to this committee making progress at this time is that sort of butting heads of, we could just do this, and what about this? Let's not miss an opportunity. And I feel like this committee has been pretty productive when we've broken into small groups and really thought about alternatives and possibilities. And what we might come to is that there isn't one, or we might come to the most amazing structure that lots of other SUs in the state use. But I wonder if we might use our time well to break up into groups and really give that possibility of an alternative structure some thought and some time, so that we can move forward.
Okay. And I think this actually draws perfectly into the timeline aspect, because we all now have the timelines kind of broken down for us for the 2 ways, town election day next year and the November election point. And I hate to be the negative Nancy of the group, but for me even, The presidential election one seems tight to me, not that the other one doesn't either, but particularly tight. And I would say almost that I think it would be unreasonable with how far I think we need to go in coming to a consensus before we even move forward on writing the Articles of Association, which I feel actually is a great opportunity for a lot of the things that we find annoying about a unified structure to fix within Articles of Association, because they're pretty open to being written in whatever way we want, I think. But I think that's going to take some time too. Like, Articles of Association is not going to be something we knock out in one meeting. And we haven't even gotten to what we want to write Articles of Association about. So I think if we all take a look at the timeline, if you have questions about the timeline specifically that Andrew laid out, I think we as a group need to come to a decision as which timeline we want to be hitting, if either of those realistically make sense, because that's going to guide us on when we need to start making some very serious decisions to be able to keep moving forward. Mike?
Just clarification, I understand that there was a modified one that came out that I don't have in front of me.
I think it's.
Oh, it was a slight adjustment. There was a slight error or whatever that Andrew updated.
I think it's simply that November.
Yeah.
The 16, instead of all 17s, there's supposed to be 16.
Yeah.
The town meeting day 17.
So are you all set?
December through the spring should be 2016.
Right.
For the town meeting day 2017 one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
Does that make sense now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you, that's.
And, what did you say?
Before we move on to talking about the timeline, I need to respond to some of the things that were talked about, because I think it's important to, that they be addressed. Starting with Nancy's discussion with Dave Sharp, I agree that the legislature is going to be very receptive to whatever changes make sense for students. I don't want to lose track of the timeline. They're pretty close to crossover right now. The odds, I think, of getting any changes through this session are gone.
Not this session.
Slim.
Oh, right, not this session, I wouldn't think so.
So then we run into the questions of how are your districts going to be affected if we don't do anything for how long, and whether you're going to lose family students, whether you're going to lose small schools grants, whether the state is going to come along and impose something before that change happens. Obviously, if there is a proposal, then we want to talk about it, but I want to make sure that folks are clear that changing the law is not something that happens quickly. I think the idea, and maybe a way I can explain the difference, the idea of school councils, the idea of having a locally elected board of some sort, it is perfectly reasonable to come up, and perhaps even advisable to come up with a way to form groups in your local communities that provide input to the board, that provide input in terms of who is hired to be principal, or what maintenance happens in the building, or anything that makes sense. The difference, the distinction rather that I'm trying to make is input is great, but in terms of who makes the decisions, that's where the question of what's allowed in statute comes up for me. So the example that Rebecca was giving earlier, to say that a group will be formed in your town that will decide who the principal is, runs in contradiction to the statutory authority of a school board, and so I think that would be a difficult thing to go.
But having them be on the principal committee search and providing input to the school board for which candidate they should elect would be perfectly acceptable.
So you might, we'll go down this a little bit, you might write into your articles something along the lines of each community will form a local commission that will be involved in the hiring of principals, and that's obviously not legal at all, but you get the idea.
Okay, what's your last slide?
Two other things. The modified union, it does look complicated, because when you open that door, the possibilities of who's in and who's out are numerous. But it's relatively simple at a top level. You can either have everybody in, you can have one out, or two out. So there's not naming the schools, there's the districts rather that might join or not join, narrows it down a little bit more. And I think that in terms of representation on the board, we need to keep in mind that this is something that will require an attorney no matter what seems reasonable to us, because making sure that the board representation meets the requirements of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution is very important. It's very important to AOE. They want a letter from an attorney saying that your board composition meets that requirement. Essentially, you need to have rough, as close as you can get, proportional representation. If there's 3,000 people in one town and 2,000 in the other, then you should probably have 3 representatives from one town and 2 from the other, or something along those lines, depending on how the math works. Thank you.
Okay, Jen, I saw your hand.
Yes, well, so I'm quite interested in knowing more and learning more about the statutory requirements for school boards and supervisory unions, both before Act 46 and after Act 46, because it must, I would assume that it would impact that. I'm wondering if maybe we could explore, and I'm happy to do this research, but whether like the VSBA maybe has some sort of documents that would be helpful to school boards on that.
You can just ask Andrew. They have a variety of opinion letters and some other resources available, and I think that if we contact them, they can tell us yeah or nay, or whether or not they have like a breakdown of EC kind of guidelines or not.
So there were no changes to how school boards and supervisory unions and districts operate. They essentially, Act 46 says let's combine those entities in ways that make more sense for students.
It's exactly the same. You could look it up online.
Great, so then some sort of already available document that's published by someone who is an authority on statute would be a great reference for this committee.
Maybe.
Just clarification, Ted, you're looking for the difference between a supervisory union board and a local board?
I think she just
Well,
wants
she
clarification
just-
for.
The statement was that there are statutory requirements for what a board can do, what it can delegate, like so.
Very clear in Title
For
16, I can
example,
get
we
that.
can't.
Yeah,
Right.
Title
Right,
16.
I just, boom, one after
Title
another.
16.
Title 16, I was just looking at it
I
today.
can look.
The responsibilities of local boards. Supervisory union board's responsibility is much narrower, really.
But if we were to form a unified union, we wouldn't have a supervisory union anymore.
Correct.
Right?
But it's for any board, that they just talk about any board.
Right.
Mike, I saw your hand, and then Ed, I saw your hand, and if anybody else had their hand up, I did not see you, so.
I think I got it, I think I'll.
Pass, okay, come back, okay. Ed,
Getting back to the timelines that you put up here,
yeah,
Andrew, I'd like to know what information we still need in order to reach the decision about the structure we proposed by April. Because if we can't reach that waypoint, election day timeline is out, as far as I can see.
I agree with Rebecca's concern earlier that it doesn't seem as though this group is ready to propose a structure, because once you get to that point, then we need to write the articles, and that going through the articles as a committee is an important part of the process, and there are some concepts in there in the wording that just take some time to get comfortable with. And there are a bunch of issues. I don't know how many of you read through the hundreds of pages of articles of agreement that were sent out. And I've seen a bunch of those, and it takes a while to sort of get through and around all of those. So I'm getting off your question.
Well, I understand that, but I can't imagine that we as a group of 15 or so are going to write those articles. Will subcommittee that work for us to approve?
You would probably ask me to bring you a rough draft. Not that you have to like what it is, but there's pretty standard language. Sometimes I might pull from 2 or 3 documents that have already been created that do the same thing to give you an idea. That's generally the most efficient. You don't have to like what I write. It does have to be approved by an attorney in the end, so often being similar to what has already been done is what makes the most sense.
okay, I saw Herb hand up next. Go ahead, Herb.
Oh, I wanted to follow up, I think, a little bit on what I think Ed was trying to say, is, what do we need to have in order to get to these different timelines? And one of the things is, what information we need in order to make some decisions. And I can see, I mean, I think we've talked about this a number of times. There's a fiscal tool that's out there. We've never, I haven't been able to get around my head what these incentives mean in dollars and cents. You know, what sort of, you know, if we didn't go this certain way and we forego the incentives, what would we be giving up in terms of money? And I also think it's really important, I mentioned this before, that we do some kind of look back over the past 5 years. If we were a unified consolidated district 5 years ago, what would we have been able to do in terms of cost and quality that we haven't been able to do? I think that would be very helpful in understanding what we should be doing.
So I'm going to answer one part of your question, then I think Armando has the other one. I took time when I was speaking with Howard about our budget to talk to him about your idea, because I thought he might have some ideas of how we could do a 5-year look back. And he said there's no way to run the numbers so closely that he could do an effective job, because how to make those decisions. No, I know, but here's my recommendation is that we use our small groups and we each start with where we were 5 years ago and walk through as groups what decisions might have been differently, and then see if we can at least grossly say where there might have been some savings or cost benefit, and that might get us closer.
Or quality benefits too.
Right, just start on that, because I think it might just be a helpful walkthrough, just for us to see what it might have looked like. And I think our small groups are very effective like that, and I think it might just at least get us started on that part of your request. And then Armando for the fiscal.
So just to follow up,
Sure.
if we can include, okay, so that the timeline I think is missing. You know, when do we need to have some information before us, before we make some of those decisions?
Yeah, I think it's because April is so quick that there was no place to put it in.
Well, it still needs to be there because.
No, I know, but I mean, realistically, with how many meetings we have left, and to have the decision of which governance structure, it doesn't leave us any time to have, I don't think, these discussions. But Armando, you had, now that the budgets are over, we can get the fiscal.
We can start getting some of that fiscal information that folks may need. What I would need is what do people want. I don't want to have Howard spending all kinds of time
The
putting stuff
rundown by
together.
the VSBA,
The,
that one to start with.
there's a, and I think we sent some emails a while ago,
Yep.
the district management commission, I can't remember the name of the folks that put that tool together.
Howard and Katrina both knew what it was.
Okay.
So what?
I just wrote myself an email to check with that tomorrow.
So what gets input into that is some assumptions about whether the population of students are going to go up or down. There's a couple of broad assumptions that you put in. The big piece that that tool offers is for you to see what a combined budget would look like and what the effects would be of losing small schools grants and tandem students, which I know is important for you. What it does not show is any of the educational benefits, and it doesn't show any economies of scale or any financial savings that you might find otherwise.
But it's a good place to start. So we are going to get on that, because budget's all passed, awesome. Now we have the SU's office support because we waited for those. Now I saw lots of hands up, so if people's hands could go back up. I saw Mike's first, then Jen's, and then Elaine's, and then Nancy's, right? Or did I miss anybody else? Am I saying your name wrong?
Elin.
Elin, I'm sorry.
No, that's
Just correct me. I try to remember off of our things, but I'm sorry.
So I'm going back, Andrew. I think I'm hearing you say that current statute would prevent us from creating a new governance structure for our 6 schools that would move many of the governance responsibilities to a new unified board while maintaining some key governance decision-making at the local level. Let me just say the beginning of that sentence again. I think you're telling me that current statute would prevent us from creating that. And that's something that we need to get a really good answer on, because if you're right, I'm not convinced that you're right, but if you're right, it very much changes the possibilities of what this group can do.
So
Yes.
I would prefer you not to answer tonight, and for us to actually get an official opinion from somebody who can give that opinion. because that is not
Former
the case.
commissioner?
Yeah, well. Yeah,
Sure,
but
that's
I won't put you on the spot right now, but what I'm saying is, that is an incredibly good, I think, question, and I think it's one that we need to take some time and possibly even get in writing.
But, I mean, this is straightforward, unfortunately.
There's no, the answer I think is no. You cannot, I mean, the board has the law says the school board will do X, Y, Z. I assume that a board could say, okay, in hiring of a principal, we're gonna abdicate our responsibility and give it to these groups of unelected officials to make that decision. If this is what I'm hearing.
Or they might be elected officials.
Elected by,
Town.
yeah.
Is what they want.
I think what you're talking about is, and frustrated. So I'm trying to be really careful what I say. School councils are all over the country. There are districts that are the size of our state that are students. And what they've done is they formed school councils. However, the school councils in most of those places, at least the ones that I've experienced when I've traveled nationally, do not have the authority of a school board. They have the authority to say, okay, we're the group that's going to oversee Mount A. This year, our theme is going to be, you know, back to nature, I don't know. We're gonna do X, Y, Z, but it's not that statutory authority. However, that committee can also be the, let's say there's a principal opening. They could be designated by the larger board to say, the school council will manage the interview process and make a recommendation to us, who we then will make a final decision. But as far as the current law is very clear on what a board's responsibilities are and are not, or aren't, rather. So I think if some of those things want to happen, then the law will have to change. And going back to the law changing, whatever it was that Dave told you, I would be pretty annoyed as a community that voted yesterday that all of a sudden, somebody else, they've come up with a new model that was not available to us. I doubt very much that that would fly with the communities that have already passed mergers or are on that way. Because then we would have an advantage that they did not have. So I think that's where the idea of having somebody change the law, and maybe David really thinks that he can do that, then he should go ahead and do it. My experience working in Montpelier for 5 years and sitting in that ed committee and working with them does not give me hope that something will happen. So I think that, you know, again, back to the question is the law is the law. But we can get VSBA to come in and give us a more official.
And I think specifically too, having our system act as one district but still elect basically local boards for each school building would probably not fly either, because again, it's not in the spirit of the idea of unifying it or providing efficiencies. Not to say it can't be done, because I am not providing that opinion. I'm just saying that's how it seems to keep coming back to us every time we ask these questions up to the VSBA or our consultant or other people that have a lot of experience. So if you would like me to, I'm happy to try to get something in writing from somebody currently at the VSBA or somewhere that would answer that question. And I just need a yes or no if we need that.
No, but I'm sorry. What are you going to ask? What question are you going to ask?
Mike's question.
But Mike,
that's a good
they're not
starting
going to
point.
be able to. Mike didn't articulate.
Mike can
details.
email me his question.
Can-
That's what I'm saying. I'm
we can
not
work on
putting
making
anybody
sure
on the
we
spot,
have the
but
right
I'm
question.
saying we could actually have us create the question Mike specifically wants asked, and I'm happy to facilitate it being answered by somebody that can provide the answer. But what I need for us to do right now is we keep on, and I know this is hard, but the timeline is something we have to decide first. I really appreciate the discussion going on, but without a commitment to a timeline, we are shooting ourselves in the foot in my mind, because we have no way to know when we have to have these decisions made. And it'd be very helpful to me in planning our meetings going forward and our community engagements that we need to have, if I had a timeline that I knew the board was committed to. So if it's possible, I would really like us to get that accomplished in this meeting, as it is the beginning of March.
I move
My
Want a
question
motion?
is about, I mean, my point
Is
is
it
about
about
the
the timeline?
timeline, yeah.
Nancy, then, about the timeline.
One of the things we were talking about at two previous meetings was the idea of coming up with 2 or more ideas about what this could look like and presenting those for input at community forums before we decide if there is one that we want to take to voters. So I think we need to build that into the timeline. And I'm not sure I saw it explicitly here. And I mean, I must say, I do think in the end that one of those options is going to probably be a unified union. And the other is going to be some kind of alternate structure, whether it's an improvement on what we've got that doesn't even require a vote, but maybe changes some of the responsibilities of different boards, or a structure that isn't part of, you know, the models that Andrew has shown us.
I think the timelines that Andrew created, I tried to leave them where they were because I think it gives enough information for us to decide which one we can handle. And then I'm happy to create, based on which timeline we pick, the very specific timeline up to the point where we have to have the decision made of what we would need to have accomplished up to that point. And then we can add in from there anything else that we would need to do community-wise past the point of decision. And I'm willing to put in that time and effort with Andrew or whoever else I need to in all the coordinations with the towns. But until we pick one timeline,
You want a motion?
I'm happy if somebody has one that they would like to
I'll
give.
move that the timeline be framed around having a vote on town meeting day 2017.
Okay, do I have a
Second.
second? I have a second from Michaela. Any further discussion? Stephen?
I'm perfectly willing to do that, but I would want, I'd like to amend that with a determine the governance structure by the end of May.
And I'm willing to do that as long as we get the information that we're looking for.
Wait a minute.
That's,
We had a motion.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's do this. Let's just work on the main motion, and then we can go back and decide if we want to actually create an additional motion for anything more specific.
That's fine. I
Okay.
withdraw my amendment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ed?
I object. I don't see what's preventing us from moving and deciding by April, frankly. I think what we have here are a number of suggestions which aren't going to fly and only delay. And I object to the delay.
Explain to me again what the delay is.
Delay in reaching a decision about which structure we're going to recommend.
I didn't think
That's
we were
not
doing
on
that.
the
I
agenda.
thought we were just agreeing that by town, we would be having the vote go to voters by town meeting days, the
Right,
final.
and I see no reason why we can't go for the general election day. I think it's a
Oh,
better
okay, I'm sorry. I was just
opportunity to
misunderstanding.
get the sense of the people.
Okay, any further discussion? Elin?
Yeah,
Perfect, okay.
as much as I would like to do it on election day, because I think more people will come out, I really think that that doesn't give us enough time for the community engagements that we really need to do. And even if they're not about, even if the only thing available to us is the unified district, we still need to do those about the the articles. And it doesn't even, it doesn't seem like there's enough time even before May to do those. Because I don't understand what those articles are gonna be and the parts about who's gonna own property and things like that. And I think we have to be able to present those to the community and discuss them and get opinions. And I don't think, unfortunately, if we can't have more of the summer, I don't think that we have the time to do that.
Anybody else have any further discussion? Yes.
I, in part, agree with Elin. Except to say that if you're not going to allow us to reinvent the wheel here, then there may not be another option for us other than what we've been given. And, you know, what I'm hearing is we can't reinvent the wheel. So I'm just a little discouraged about that part.
Anything else, Nancy?
Well, I have two things. One's a question, and one is not. The question is, what are the financial implications of of not having a town meeting, a vote until town meeting day? That's one question. And the other thing I just want to say is, I really do think that there's more is possible here than we know right now. And I feel like that I do think that we may have a chance here to invent something, or a way of doing something that's already invented that might not only meet the goals of the legislation, but go beyond that in terms of making sure that we can attract superintendents, candidates in the future, and making sure that the meeting load for everyone is reasonable and doable, and also making sure that our towns retain a sense of responsibility for and engagement in their schools. So, and I think all of those goals are really important. So, I don't think we should prejudge too quickly what might be possible. I don't think we should be crazy, but I think we may be able to come up with something either both as in a unified union structure and in an alternate structure that would meet all those goals.
Remember, we're still focusing on the amendment, so if everybody can just make
So
sure.
my question about the timeline, besides my statement about the timeline is, if we're really going to do what I just described, it is going to take more time.
Okay.
At the same time, my question is, what are the financial implications in terms of tax rates and losing Phantom students and all that, of going for town meeting day 2017 rather than November 2016?
My understanding is we would have the budgets come out for the next school year then, and we would be in the same position that we were this year, and that no benefits for the Act 46 stuff comes into play until it's actually been passed and put into effect. So whatever the current legislative decisions are regarding Act 46 and the implications thereof would still impact our budgets, would still impact whatever Phantom students they have going on. Everything else would remain the same like it did this year.
So it wouldn't make any difference if we vote in November or vote financially, or if we vote in March?
That I don't know.
It does by time. I think Nancy, if you vote by March or town meeting day of 2017, then you are eligible for some.
Oh, yes, but I'm saying if we vote them, that year's budget will still have to fall under the Act 46, whatever our normal requirements were this year, because we wouldn't meet those yet until it actually went into play. So on the day of the vote, when we're voting for town budgets, we wouldn't be having tax benefits yet come into play. That right then. We wouldn't be prevented from losing additional Phantom students still, right?
So there's really two questions I think that you're asking. The first question is, when do we have to vote? And a vote between July 1st of this year and June 30th of next year has this. There's no difference in terms of incentives, loss of Phantom students. The second question is, if the vote is affirmative, how quickly does the new district form? Because that's when that district forms, that's the tax year in which you would start seeing your incentives.
That's the answer.
Yeah.
So, and just to add on to the last piece, is you don't want to underestimate the amount of time and effort that it's going to take to form this new district. Even though you're all friendly people who know each other, figuring out how to do that together is a challenge.
And a lot of work for the superintendent's office.
It's a tremendous amount of work. So,
Okay. Allison.
I'm in agreement with Ed in that I don't see what taking time between election day and town meeting day, what that's going to give us, because if we do the town meeting day, we run into September, October, November, December, January, February, March, February, trying to figure out our budgets for the coming year. So all the school boards are going to be busy doing that, and those of us that are members on those boards are going to be doing that. And we're going to have the same crunch of time trying to get together all of our articles of agreement, regardless of which one we do. Because if we give ourselves more time, we're going to take that time. Whereas if we tell ourselves now, we're going to be done, and this is what we're going to do. Because we had this same discussion back when we started doing this. Well, we could have had this done in March for the, you know.
Assuming we could get a consensus.
Right, but I think it's just giving us more and more time to keep treading the same water because we're having the same questions asked over and over again.
Okay, if you've already spoken on this subject, I think we need to start limiting it so we can actually take a vote on this amendment and actually move forward, because again, this is why I'm worried about our timeline, is because it takes us a long time to get through some things that maybe it takes longer. Go ahead, Jen.
So I think that the second part of Andrew's comments is really relevant, and to me, I can't see whether we vote on election day or town meeting day that we would be able to put our new district in place in June of 2017. Am I talking about the right year? Yes. So no matter what, we're looking at June of 2018, right? July 1, 2018 when it goes into place. So to me, I don't think that it's that significant. I have to say that my concern, I really agree with Elin, we have not gotten any community input officially as a committee. I don't know how we can pick a structure to pursue until we get some community input. Like, it feels very irresponsible to me. Because, and I think that's part of what's holding us back, because we're all representing what we think. We're not representing what we've heard from our community. And I think even if it was a survey, something to start getting some of that input of what do our people care about? Because maybe they don't care about the stuff that we're spending hours arguing about.
They might know something.
I'll just say, Jen just said very clearly what I was going to say about the importance of going to the communities.
Pick up your pens or fingers, because I have the exact statute for the rights of the school board so that you can all write them down.
What statute is it?
It's
VSA.
VSA Title 16, Chapter 9, Subchapter 4, Section 563. I'm going to say it again. VSA Title 16, Chapter 9, Subchapter 4, Section 563.
And there are a couple of other, that will then also send you to a couple of other places that, but that's the main body.
Thank you, Armando. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and call the vote. As you recall, in one of our very first meetings, part of the rules that we set up for our own committee was that any vote like this would have to be approved not by a mere majority, but by a 2/3 vote. And that being in place, that is what we'll use to make the determination of this motion. And to refresh, the motion is that our timeline would be for the town election date of 2017. Did I say that right?
Town meeting.
Town meeting, 2017. Okay, so and I need hands raised for a minute so that I can count. Caleb, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So by voting yes for this, then that would preclude doing the earlier date.
So in my mind, it doesn't preclude during the earlier date if we happen to get there more quickly. It just says that we are committed as a committee to getting there by that date. Okay? I'm all in favor of getting there quicker and cleaner than we had imagined, but it says that that's the stop date so that we can backtrack, because that way we know when we have to have our decision made at a dead last point to be able to get it through all the reviews that need to be made in order to get it to the public for vote.
And I have a question also. And we're saying this, doing this, setting a date presumes that we decide there's something to vote on.
That is the purpose of, yes. That would assume that we have decided as a committee that we are putting something to vote.
Right.
If we didn't have something to vote.
But if we do.
Right, but that means by the
date
date that we have to decide, we know that that date we need to decide, because otherwise we wouldn't get to the town for vote. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands and leave them in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then all those opposed. And I'm just going to count total for me, with not including these two guys. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But I count as a person, and generally the chair doesn't vote unless there's some kind of tire prevention for it, is how I generally do it.
Well, if you vote, then it's gonna pass, and if you don't, it doesn't.
Was that 8 yes, 6 no?
It
One
was 8
abstention?
yes, 5 no.
5 no.
But I want to do the math just at that.
The line for 2/3 is between 8 and 9.
It's somewhere between 8 and 9.
I can tell you for sure. 8.
So that counts as a tie.
That's
It's
great.
a tie, right? It's effectively a tie.
Okay, so here's my concern with me voting is, here's my concern with me voting is that in general, as the chair, I don't like to seem like I'm siding one way or the other, so that everybody feels comfortable speaking their mind and we all feel like we have an open place to discuss things, and that I'm not taking sides, that everybody feels like we're just keeping things, whatever. I also have concern that we apparently really have still a big split in terms of our timelines. And the bigger concern I have is that even saying that we want quick motion or we want to make resolutions is that as a group, we have a lot of difficulty making even simple decisions. And that is not to say it's on any one person, that's just to say that with a large group like that, it's very difficult. And I'm going to stay in abstention. I'm just going to say that we didn't meet enough to pass that motion right now. So we will come back to it, but I would like to use the little bit of time we have left to actually make some movement in terms of some of the things that we need to actually still accomplish for tonight on our agenda. Yes, Allison?
Should I just say, so we didn't reach consensus on a town meeting day vote, but we didn't vote on the election day.
Correct.
So can somebody make a motion
Anybody
to
can
do that?
Anybody can make a motion if they would like to, as long as it's germane.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, guys, I need your attention because Allison's making a motion. Allison?
I would like to make a motion that we have our decision made and before the voters in time for Election Day 2016.
Okay.
Is that correct? Is that how I want it?
That is a correct date. Do I have a second? I have a second by Ed. All those in favor, again, I need you to raise your hands and keep them high.
Discussion.
Well, we just had discussion about the same topic basically in reverse. So again, in order to facilitate us actually making movement as a group, I would recommend, unless the discussion is significantly different from the one we previously had, for us to go ahead and vote on it. So if you still have something significantly different, Elin.
I don't know why people voted no. And maybe I'm in agreement once I hear, because a lot of people that voted no, who I'm assuming are going to vote for this, didn't speak. And so I would really like to know.
Okay. Well, Ed spoke, Allison spoke, and I believe a couple other people made comments regarding some of that. Did somebody else who voted no want to speak as to their reason why? Because I feel like we had this discussion. Dawn,
I have not spoken.
feel free.
I voted no because I really feel like, given the opportunity for this group to take a little longer, they will take a little longer. And we need to get out and get that feedback from our community members to base our decisions on. And we need to do something to get ourselves moving, is how I feel. You know, we might put out to hear from our community members and find out that we're all wrong, in which case we'll have to correct and go from there. And that's why I voted no. We need to get to a point where we're getting some information that we can use to base our decisions to get moving, I feel.
Okay. Okay. Stephen.
Very quickly, I also voted no, and on very much the same basis. We kind of, as a committee, made a commitment for this November 4th deadline, for the election deadline. A while back. We did.
Hold on, let's not get into an off-sided conversation, please.
That was
Stephen,
my
finish.
understanding, that we were headed in that direction, and I don't see a reason at this time to back away from that.
Okay, so, all those in favor of Allison's motion to have our decision and be ready to put a vote, if necessary, in front of the townspeople by the November 2016 presidential election, please raise your hands and keep them raised so that I may take account. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, we have 9 for, opposed. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those abstaining? Okay, 9 has it clearly by a 2/3, as we previously discussed. So we will make movement for the November presidential election. With that in mind, I am going to recommend that our first order of business to make sure that this starts to happen with community involvement is that we offer for a subcommittee to get together a very general mailing that maybe has a couple questions or check mark boxes where people could list their main concerns or recommendations or something like that for the Act 46 committee. And we can have them mailed out or emailed out through front porch forums, however we want to do that. Nancy?
Well, a different suggestion would be that we quickly design 2 different alternatives and try to describe them as clearly as we can. Probably a unified union and an alternate structure of some kind, and present that to people for feedback. You know, describe it as well as we can and get people's feedback. Because people, we don't, unless we give people something to respond to that's somewhat concrete, we'll be really wasting their time.
Okay, I disagree in that I think we could just get feedback about what people are concerned about, because I did hear already from a variety of people that have expressed concerns to me just in general about Act 46. But I'm fine doing that too if we could do it quickly so that we could actually get something out. I also think that we should have our next meeting at one of the other towns in one of the other schools, because we could start having meetings in different locations and advertise them. Maybe not as a community forum, but an opportunity for people maybe from those towns to feel more comfortable coming. So I'm happy to take a suggestion, but I think any of the towns would be fine and we can just start rotating through them. Jen first, Ed next. Go for it, Jen.
I don't see, I like Nancy's suggestion. I don't see why we can't do both and work on both things, so maybe 2 separate subgroups, and I would be happy to lead up working with a few people on putting together a survey.
Okay, Ed?
My hope is, though, that whatever alternative is put up, and I agree with the idea of choice to get a better sense, that whatever alternative is one that is also legal.
It's also what?
Legal, he said.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's go in alphabetical order for schools, for elementary districts. Does that sound fair to everybody? I don't want to pick favorites or anything, but would that be Beaman alphabetically? Am I missing anybody?
Depends on whether it's New Haven or
School or
Beaver.
town.
Oh, I was going by school, but that's just me. So next meeting will be at Beaman, if that's.
Terrific.
Is that okay with you guys? Okay. Same date, same time, just different location.
Just about the date, I know that I spoke to Katrina before I left, and they're now in the finalists for the principal interview, and she was looking at dates, and there are so many meetings going on in this district that she's having a hard time figuring out. One of the dates that she basically looked at and said, oh, we can't because of the Act 46 meeting. And I said, look, you need to do what you need to do. And if that means that people can't go to the Act 46 meeting, or the Act 46 meeting has to change, to me, that's something that has to happen, and there's a very short window. So we can have, schedule it 2 weeks from today.
Yeah.
But if there is a meeting, if there is something going on for the high school principal that night, there may be folks around this table who may. But there may be the community, there's that whole community piece, the school board. I'm just saying that, she's trying to work around it because she knows, but that means that she has.
One Friday in the whole month of March.
Exactly, she's got, Friday's not a good day to have a.
So I'm gonna leave it where it is.
Leave it as it is,
Yeah, I'm
yes.
gonna leave it where it
Yes.
is, and if something significantly changes where like everybody's not gonna be there, we can't get a quorum, I will send out an email. So if you are not going to be there, we find out later you're not gonna be there, as always, if you could email me and let me know, just helps me make sure we don't have people coming out when we're not gonna have enough people to actually have a meeting.
We'll know by Monday, I think, when the date, so
Fair enough.
plenty of time.
Okay, so we made that decision. Beaman, March 16th, 6:30 at night, and where do you guys normally meet?
Where in the music
We'll be
room?
downstairs, yes.
Oh, down in the.
In the library?
Library?
Next to the library,
Oh, that big room.
the big room that right now, yes.
Okay, so that's where you're gonna head. And then for the rest of tonight, if we wanna get out an alternate structure, I recommend we break up into 2 to 3 groups and start coming up with some plans of alternate structures. I'm going to give us 20 minutes to at least start coming up with ideas, and then we might have to work on them some more later. Jen?
I'm happy to wait till after the small group, but I would like someone else, if we're gonna go forward with the survey, I don't wanna do that by myself. So.
No, but
can
I
we
wanna
discuss
see if
that?
we get the alternate structure, because it may decide the timeline of when we actually put something out, if we wanna put them out together. Mike?
I have are we coming back together?
I'm leaving 10 minutes at the end for us to come back together, if that's okay with everybody. Anybody else? Okay. Let's go with tinier groups rather than bigger groups, because it's gonna be a lot more kind of down and dirty. So we'll do 3s, and I'm just gonna count you off. Starting over here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
It doesn't make groups of 3.
What? No, not groups of 3, I mean, I'm gonna split up into thirds. Is that okay? Sorry, I said it wrong. All the math people in here are just gonna get me.
No, I'm gonna one.
Oh, okay, hold on. I'm just gonna start over because I am confused now. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. I call 1 right here. Oh, sorry, did I say that?
It's not 1, 2, 3, we're.
The meeting back to order at 8:22. Yes, I can still talk louder if necessary. Yeah,
Except they
thank
can't.
you. It's cold in here.
Cold there. Look at her.
Okay, so 8:22. As guys, hello.
Hey, shut up.
Please. I want to keep us so we can leave on time. I know that we have good discussions. It's hard to end them. But I feel like this was again a productive use of our time for the breakouts into the small groups. Okay, we have a few minutes. Jen offered to head a subcommittee that could get together and at least start a template to bring back to our next meeting of what a flyer or engagement with the community on a survey level could look like, and she needs at least 2 more bodies. Stephen has volunteered. A work group, not a subcommittee, a work group. Stephen is on it now. Now it's exciting because Stephen and Jen are both on it. Somebody else is going to want to do this with them because, trust me, you don't want to be left out. Ed. Okay, I have 3. If anybody else wants to do it, let them know. We just need to make sure we don't hit a quorum as usual so we don't violate any open meeting laws when you're getting together. Okay, so their goal is to bring us something. It doesn't have to be exact in all the specifics, obviously, but something as a template to begin for our next meeting so that we'll be able to hopefully revise it and send it out shortly after our next meeting. I think that if we want, oh goodness, did somebody take notes from each group on your ideas? I'm going with the no, apparently. Notes from each group, we did.
The number ones.
Yeah, the number ones have it, obviously.
Go ahead,
Okay, I'm going to recommend then that although we started, if each person from the group can kind of put your thoughts down on paper, that maybe you got inspired based on this conversation with what your alternative structure would look like, and bring it as well to the next meeting. We will bring this into the big group discussion and try to whittle down what we all have in common and go from there and fight over the last of the things that we don't have in common to hopefully at least develop a fairly general picture of what an alternate structure might look like, knowing that once we get some financial details or some other details, we might fine-tune it according to some of that information, okay? Any last questions or concerns, Jen?
Can I ask for a timeline when we expect to have that financial model provided and presented by the SU office?
I don't know what Jen, I can't answer the timeline because I don't know how complicated it is. But I know that I talked to Howard about that and he's ready to start on it once. So we're gonna look at that model that.
A unified union.
No, there was some.
It's a software package.
It's a software
Yes,
package
yeah.
that, you know.
But I mean, it's a software package that would give us the financial information for our SU based on the model of a unified
Yes.
union.
I guess, I'm not
Yes.
familiar with it at all, so.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we don't know exactly when we'll get that information, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, but also, please, as part of your homework, start getting your thoughts together about if you were looking back 5 years, what you think some of the major changes would have been if we had been in a different structure than we are now, so that when we get together next time, part of it will be a breakout session to discuss that as well, to start Herb's timeline of what would things have looked like differently if we had gone unified 5 years ago, and would we have seen any significant changes in what we've done versus, what we would have done versus what we've already done. And I think if we all sit down mentally and kind of think about that on ourselves, maybe it will just go a little smoother and we'll have a little bit more discussion that's really on point with that. Ela?
What are we doing with our ideas about the alternative structure? Are we emailing them to somebody?
No. Write them down because we'll have a big group discussion to try to, on like a large piece of paper, define our alternate structure and hopefully find a lot of common ground that we all like or don't like, or a couple models that we can find common ground between, and then see where we differ. Jen?
I just want to say that we've been meeting since October. We haven't gotten any financial numbers yet. I understand that you guys need to assess, but if we can't look at that at the next meeting, maybe we could schedule another meeting later. I know there's a lot of meetings, but like, we have just committed tonight as a board. We voted to make a decision in April of what governance model we want to try and pursue, and we haven't seen a single number about what that means, so
I will do the best I can to get those numbers. Understand that for the last 3 months, that's all that small office has been doing. So I'm not apologizing for not having numbers, but I will do what I can to get the numbers as soon as possible.
Okay,
thank you.
Mike?
Unrelated?
Sure.
Related to our work. I just was thinking about, I'd noticed Kevin LaRose's name on the list from Bristol for a long time. I know he's not been able to make it.
He's not on the committee.
I know that there's only 4 members from Bristol here, and I was looking for an update as to whether that's just what Bristol's going to supply, or whether there's going to be another one coming. And the reason I ask it is because we're getting to a point of making decisions, and we've been through a lot of process, and if there was going to be another member from Bristol, it's a little bit awkward to have that question.
Okay, Bristol, anybody want to answer?
So I know Kevin had conflicts with fire meetings, and Justin, who was on the board, had medical reasons why he can no longer do everything that he's doing. So he unfortunately had to back out. So I don't know as far as what the school board wants to do.
Okay, so
And I do. So Diana Clark was interested, and she has been to several of our meetings. She was going to try to come tonight. She was not able to come tonight, and the previous meeting as well. But we have not officially appointed her because it keeps like getting left off the schedule. That was something that was supposed to happen.
Allison?
Armando, if you could have Karen take off the sheet of the agenda, that's where Kevin's name is showing up.
It's off now.
It's off, yes.
This past one had it off.
Oh, yeah.
Previously it was on, but
Okay.
So I think the point that Mike makes is a good one, that whatever we're going to do in terms of having our people here, we're getting to the point where we've invested enough time and energy to try to become a slightly more cohesive group in terms of the processes we've gone through to start making these decisions, that it would be both unfair to a new person and a little unfair to the group if we don't either bring somebody on board or not, and that if we can all really try to commit to finishing out the process. So with that, have a great night. I'm going to sit here for a few extra minutes if anybody needs anything.
Would you like someone to move?
I don't think you're gonna want me to make a fire drill, Kayla. We need a motion to adjourn. I'm so excited.
I so moved.
Steven, second by Jen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?